The Varn battlecruiser Absolute Dominion dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the human solar system. Admiral Vorkin did not look away from his charts. He had done this 114 times. 114 planets, 114 civilizations. Each of them had the same moment, that long, sickening silence when they looked at their sky and understood what was hanging over their world. Some of them screamed, some went deathly quiet, some of them fired their weapons, which Vorkin respected in a distant professional way, much as a surgeon might respect a body's instinct to resist the blade. This planet was called Earth, which was one of the most unimaginative names Vorkin had ever encountered. The species was called humans. Their history spanned roughly 4,000 years, with recorded civilization at about 6,000, which was very young by galactic standards, almost infantile. Their fastest ships could move at roughly 0.5% of the speed of light. They had placed a structure on their moon and a small pressurized station on the fourth planet in their system, a rust-red rock they called Mars. Their military technology was standard for fourth-class worlds. Nuclear weapons, which were destructive, but which Dominion shields had handled with ease for 200 years. About 40 orbital defense platforms, a ground-based planetary defense network. All of it was as impressive as a child's drawing of a bridge. One could see the idea in it, the intent, and there the admiration ended. Vorkin positioned his 600 ships over the planet's northern polar axis and opened the planetary broadcast system. The message would reach every communication receiver on the surface within 9 seconds. The Dominion language system had been secretly studying human transmissions for 4 years. Every major language, every regional deviation worth mapping. The translation would be clean and precise. He composed the message without much care. He had spoken this message so many times that it lived more in his hands than in his head. He transmitted it. Then he returned to his resource extraction charts. The planet had significant mineral deposits in its lower crust. The oceans were biologically productive in a way that would interest the Dominion's cataloging teams. 200 years of mining would be highly profitable. After that, the world would be reclassified and abandoned. He did not think of the people on it again. By nature, he was not a cruel being. He had simply never been given a reason to think of the people on fourth-class worlds as people. They were a feature of the landscape, just like the mineral deposits. He went back to his maps. On Earth, the signal reached every screen simultaneously. It interrupted a football match in Brazil. It invaded a parliamentary session in India. It appeared on a billboard in Times Square and on the cracked phone screen of a farmer checking the weather in rural Kenya. It was broadcast on a small television in a warehouse in Chicago, where a man named Darnell set his work scanner on a shelf, stared at the screen, and did not move for a long time. The message played in 247 languages. It sounded twice automatically, and then the channel closed. For about 90 seconds, most of the internet went almost completely silent. Not because the networks went down, they didn't. They went silent because hundreds of millions of people were looking at screens and not typing, not sharing, not calling anyone. They were just watching. Then the noise returned, louder than it had ever been on the internet before. Government channels across the planet lit up simultaneously. Military facilities shifted to emergency protocols that had been secretly updated annually for the last decade, based on threat assessments classified above the level of most generals. In 38 countries, hardened bunkers opened. In those same 38 countries, specific phones rang with a tone that had never been used in a real situation, and the people who answered the phone were given the same 2 sentences. Timeline activated. Report to your assigned station. The UN Emergency Council convened 41 minutes later in a bunker beneath UN headquarters in New York. The room had been built specifically for this occasion. Most of the people sitting in it now were seeing it for the first time. 15 people sat at the table. The room was gray, clean, and very cold. On one wall hung a large screen showing the Varn fleet. 600 ships arranged with a geometric precision that communicated more clearly than any weapon that they had done this before. Many times, and that it always ended the same way. Secretary-General Amara Oside sat at the head of the table and said nothing for the first 11 minutes. She was 53 years old, born in Accra, and she had held the post for 6 years. She was not a soldier, and she had never pretended to be. But she had a quality rare in any profession, the ability to be completely still under pressure, not frozen, but still, like very deep water. She allowed them to speak. General Pak of the Korea Joint Defense Command held a tablet and was carefully and honestly working through the numbers, which was the right thing to do, and also the most terrifying thing anyone in the room had ever seen. "Our orbital platforms can engage," he said. "I want to be honest with everyone here. At best, this will be symbolic. Their shields absorb energy at levels our best weapons cannot match. A fully coordinated nuclear strike, with all platforms firing simultaneously, wouldn't pierce a single capital ship. We have roughly 47 minutes of reliable resistance before we face unrestricted orbital bombardment. Then we negotiate," Minister Farouk said. "We buy time." "The message did not offer negotiations," Commander Vasquez said. Her voice was steady. "It offered surrender. There is a significant difference between signing a document and fulfilling it sincerely. We sign, we create space, we think," said Dr. Luwe, who had spent 30 years studying first contact scenarios and now found that none of his models included the sensation of his own hands shaking when it actually happened. "What are we thinking about? We are thinking about how to mine our planet's resources for 200 years while they catalog our oceans," Commander Vasquez said. "That is what the next 2 centuries will look like if we sign this document. Let us not sugarcoat it." No one answered her. Amara watched everyone. Before her on the table sat a glass of water. She did not touch it. In the last 11 minutes, she had glanced at her watch 4 times. The former president of Habimana, who had been brought in from Kigali because no one wanted to make this decision without him in the room, was watching her. He noticed the watch. He wondered what it meant. Secretary-General Chen Hun leaned forward. "Amara, you haven't said a word." "I was listening," she said. "Now we need more than that." She reached for a folder in front of her. She placed a single sheet of paper in the center of the table. One large number, 4,847. The room went quiet. "Ships," she said. No one moved. She explained it as she had rehearsed, simply and without drama, because there was enough drama in the room already, and adding to it would not help anyone think clearly. 31 years ago, the Farpoint Observatory Array, a deep space listening project, classified several levels above the UN Security Council, confirmed the existence of the Varn Dominion and the direction of its expansion. Earth was in its path. The math gave us 30 to 40 years until contact. 38 nations began secret construction. Not a symbolic squad, but a fleet. Every resource that could be quietly redirected was redirected. Every shipbuilder, physicist, weapons expert, engineer, and military strategist who could be recruited without the public's knowledge was recruited. The construction took place in deep space beyond the orbit of Neptune, at coordinates located outside of any standard pre-invasion survey scan that a species conducting routine reconnaissance of a fourth-class world would check. They had been building for 31 years. They built 4,847 ships. The silence in the room was vast. "Why?" Minister Farouk said very quietly. "We weren't told," Amara said. "Because the Dominion has intelligence capabilities we don't fully understand. One leak, one wrong conversation, one intercepted message, and they would have arrived with 10,000 ships instead of 600. We needed them to see a fourth-class world. We needed them to be confident in what they saw." She paused. "We needed them to be here, in our system, before we showed them what they had missed." "You let them come," Commander Vasquez said. Her voice held something complex, not quite anger, but something that had lived on the dark side of hope for a long time and was only now turning toward the light. "We needed them to be in our system, on our soil, within our reach," Amara said. "The fleet is positioned at coordinates that their standard survey would never check for a fourth-class target. They didn't find it. They came here, looked at 40 orbital platforms and a few nuclear weapons, and they made a decision about who we were." She let that settle. "They made the wrong decision." "How many people know?" General Pack asked. "The crews of the 4,847 ships," Amara said. "The leaders of the 38 nations, the 3 secretaries, general who held this chair before me. And now us," Chen Hun said. "And now you," Amara agreed. "That is why I am asking for a decision." She laid it out clearly. The council could send the surrender message on time, drag out the process, keep the Varns occupied with paperwork and logistics while the fleet approached, or the council could authorize the fleet to move now at full speed, without pretense. The debate took 4 hours. It ended with a vote of 11 to 4 inches favor of the surrender message. Amara voted with the minority. She listened to the final tally without expression. She thanked the council for their work. She left. She walked down the hall, through 2 security doors, into a small room with 1 terminal and 1 chair. The terminal was connected via 7 encrypted relays to a receiver that had been in solar orbit at a distance of 2 astronomical units for the last 9 years. The terminal had no markings, nothing to indicate its purpose. Everyone who knew was either instructed to forget it or was careful never to ask. She stood there, briefly thinking about the weight of something so massive, finally arriving. Not the strategy, just the weight of it. How does a door feel when it opens, and you know you will never close it again? Then she typed one word: initiate. She sat in the silence of the room after she sent it. The air recycler hummed. The room smelled of plastic and cold metal. Then she stood, straightened her jacket, and went back to help the Council draft the official surrender message to the Varn Dominion. Vorkin received the Earth's surrender 17 hours later. He read it, signed the confirmation, and transmitted the standard response regarding the transition schedule for labor support personnel. He set down the stylus and allowed himself a moment of professional boredom. They always surrendered. 114 and 114. It was almost too predictable to feel satisfaction. His navigation officer spoke up. "Admiral, there is a phantom signal on the long-range array, originating roughly 40 degrees from the ecliptic. Point of origin: deep space. The coordinates show nothing on any survey." Vorkin looked at the display. The signal was faint, barely noticeable. Turbulence from the FTL entry could cause such readings, just like starlight diffraction. Under certain conditions, there was nothing at those coordinates. The pre-invasion survey had confirmed empty space. How long has it lasted? It appeared briefly and ceased. Log it. Continue monitoring. If it repeats, I want to know. He looked at the signal for another 3 seconds. Then he looked away. There was nothing there. Fourth-class worlds didn't hide things in deep space. They barely had the technology to reach the edge of their own solar system. Whatever the phantom signal was, it was a sensor artifact. It was nothing. He went to sleep. In deep space, past the coordinates where the Varn scout drone had flown without slowing down, lights flickered on. One ship, then 10, then 50, then 300, then 800, then 1,000, 500, then 3,000, and the number continued to grow. Ship after ship emerging from standby into full combat readiness. Marker lights blinked in the dark like a field of cold stars, recognizing they were allowed to be visible. 4,847 human ships, built over 3 decades of fear, stubbornness, and a very human refusal to face the end of everything without throwing everything they had at it first. On the bridge of the fleet flagship, the hull designation ESF-01 with no name written on its hull had been nameless all these years because a name made it real, and making it real before time was a risk they could not take. Admiral Yusuf Mubarak read Amara's one word on his terminal. He stood. He looked at his crew, the men, the women, and the people who had trained for this moment for most of their adult lives. Some of them had parents who had trained for it before them, children of the program. Each of them carried 31 years of preparation in their bones. "All ships, confirm," Admiral Mubarak said. His voice was level. "We move out in 12 hours. He looked at the distant light of the human sun, small, yellow, and very far away. "We are coming," he said quietly, to no one in particular. To everyone. The fleet turned for home. The first Varn assessment teams landed 18 hours after the surrender message was sent. They descended in perfectly clean landing shuttles, white, featureless, silent in their descent. They landed in open fields outside major cities, on airport grounds, on cleared pads at military bases whose personnel had been ordered to retreat and not make eye contact. The teams that emerged from the shuttles were not soldiers. They wore gray uniforms with the Dominion emblem and carried cataloging equipment and portable measuring rigs. They were, by the language of their orders, resource assessment technicians. They approached the edges of the cities they were assigned to assess and began taking measurements. People in those cities watched from windows, streets, and rooftops. Some watched in silence, some filmed with phones, broadcasting what was happening to the entire world. A few people in Lagos, Lahore, São Paulo, and Melbourne stepped forward and blocked the team's paths. This happened in 12 cities in the first 2 hours. The Varn assessment teams were prepared for this. They carried devices that produced a short-pulse auditory signal, which caused disorientation and harmless collapse in most carbon-based bipedal species. The crowds fell. The teams carefully stepped around the fallen people without much emotion, like someone stepping around a puddle, and continued their assessment work. The people got up. They blocked the teams again. They fell again. They got up again. In the city of Lahore, this process repeated 9 times before the assessment team leader filed an official report of delay to the Absolute Dominion. In his report, he noted that the local population showed unusual resilience to the containment effect and requested additional security personnel. Vorkin read the report and sighed. There was always a faction. On every world, without exception, some portion of the population could not accept what their leadership had signed. It was always resolved within a few weeks. He approved the request for additional security and moved on to the documents regarding the mining schedule for Sector 41. On a floor of the UN building, the real one, not the bunker Amara Oside, sat at a glass table across from the Varn overseer, Teth, who was the official Dominion Transition Administrator for Earth. Teth was tall and thin and very still, like a person who never needed to move quickly because everything always gave way to him. His skin was a deep gray blue. His eyes were large, pale, and bright in a way that differed slightly from human eyes. He saw in the low infrared range, which meant he could see body heat, which meant he could see the blood moving under Amara's skin, even when her face was perfectly neutral. He used this to his advantage. He always knew when people were nervous. Amara, he could not read at all. The transition documentation you submitted is incomplete, Teth said. His voice came through the translator attached to his collar, a sound that was smooth, almost pleasant. We are missing surveys of regional governance structures for 43 provinces, industrial capacity assessments for 17 coastal zones, and census confirmations for— I understand, Amara said. We are working to complete these submissions. The bureaucratic infrastructure of a planet with 8 billion people and 195 sovereign nations requires time to coordinate. I hope the Dominion can appreciate the logistical complexity. The Dominion has processed the transition for civilizations of similar complexity in less time. We are doing everything we can to move efficiently, Amara said. I also wanted to raise the question of humanitarian provisions during the transition period specifically, the matter of civilian access to food distribution networks. Our models show that the presence of assessment groups in agricultural zones is creating supply chain disruptions. Teth raised a hand. Overseer Oside, he said, misusing the title, and Amara did not correct him. You know that the Dominion's patience for procedural delays is not limitless. Of course, Amara said. I am not trying to create a delay. I am trying to ensure a smooth transition that serves the interests of both sides. Unstable civilian populations at the preparation stage for mining would be counterproductive for the Dominion itself. We will stabilize the civilian population, Teth said. That is not your concern. I understand, Amara said. I will provide the remaining documentation within 24 hours, Teth said. We will do everything in our power, Amara said. Teth looked at her with his pale, thermal vision eyes. He saw her blood moving through the vessels in her face, calm and steady, every reading. He had never met a human whose body read as so still. He found it, in a way he couldn't quite define, unsettling. He closed the meeting. Amara returned to her office, sat down, and allowed herself 45 seconds of complete stillness. Then she took the documentation files she had been submitting incompletely for the last 18 hours and began inserting 7 new procedural errors into the management survey forms. She checked her watch. 8:22 a.m. The city was called Resistencia. It was a mid-sized city in northern Argentina, and it, despite its name, was chosen for what happened there, not for any ethical reason. It was chosen because it housed a military base, and the commander of that base, a general named Marcos Rien, who had 3 daughters and a long career of following orders, had decided in the last 48 hours that he was done with this and refused to withdraw his men. He locked the base down. He put his men on the walls. When the Varn assessment group arrived, he addressed them via loudspeaker and ordered them to leave. They filed a report. The report went through Teth's administrative structure and landed on Vorkin's desk. And Vorkin read it and made a decision in about 12 seconds. He selected 3 ships from the orbital formation and gave them the target coordinates. The bombardment lasted 9 minutes. The base was destroyed. 3 city blocks around it were also destroyed, which was not intentional, but also not something anyone filed a report about. 412 people died. Many others were wounded. The rest of the city fled. The message was clear. The Dominion ensured that its translation system broadcast an explanation of what happened to every screen in Argentina and a significant portion of South America. Non-compliance with transition protocols has consequences. We urge cooperation. In the UN bunker, the council watched what was happening on the screen. The room was perfectly silent when it ended. The three members who had voted for the surrender strategy no longer looked at the screen. They looked at the table. One of them, a minister from Central Europe whose name would not later be mentioned kindly in history books, said in a very quiet voice that perhaps the council should consider advising the remaining military facilities to actually retreat. "We are signing the document," he said. "If we are going to sign it, we must do it." Commander Vasquez turned to look at him with an expression that cut his sentence short before he could finish it. Amara did not take her eyes off the screen. She watched the smoke rising over Resistencia. She allowed herself to feel it. The weight of the 412 people whose deaths she hadn't been able to prevent. And she felt it fully, because she believed it was important not to shield herself from the real price of the strategy she had chosen. Then she set it aside deep down and returned to the work before her. She checked her watch. 6:40 p.m. On ESF-01, Admiral Mubarak received the report on Resistencia as he stood at the main tactical display, reviewing the formation intervals for the approach. His communications officer handed him a tablet with the data. He read it. He read the casualty count. He placed the tablet on the console. His bridge crew watched him, not looking at him the peripheral monitoring that crews perform when they want to know how their commander is processing information without being seen. Mubarak stared for a moment at the tactical display, at the line of ships behind and around him, at the distance remaining between the fleet and the edge of the solar system. 6 hours, he said, addressing no one in particular, just the air. He returned to checking the formation intervals. The fleet moved in the dark. With minimal emissions, the engines ran at 30% power without active sensor transmissions. At such a distance from the sun, passive scanning would not detect them to any sensor pointed at them. They appeared as space, nothing. The ships moved in silence. Inside them, 4,847 crews performed their final pre-start checks. Weapons officers calibrated targeting. Engineers confirmed engine readiness at 30%. Damage control officers checked hull integrity. Medical bays laid out their supplies and said nothing to each other because there was nothing useful to say. Some crew members slept. Few, but some. Those who had done this long enough to know that sleep before a battle was a professional discipline, not a luxury. Some of them wrote messages. They asked their commanders to save them and deliver them only in case something went wrong. Some of them just sat and stared at the bulkheads of their ships and thought about the world on the other side of all this. Commander Alana Reese, of the Sao Paulo, a ship named after a city that still stood, which she took as a good sign, gathered her crew in the main compartment at the 4-hour mark and spoke to them for about 3 minutes. She was not a dramatic person by nature. She said they had trained long for this and that the training had been good, and that she trusted every person in the room. She said the mission was to return home, engage the fleet in orbit, and make it clear to the Varn Dominion that they had made a very serious mistake regarding this planet and this species. Then she said, "When this is over, I'm buying the first round for every one of you." Someone in the back laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that arises when tension finds its only exit. Alana returned to the bridge. Meanwhile, on Earth, the council had splintered. The minister who had spoken after the footage from Resistencia was now not alone. A second vote was being pushed not for total submission, but for a statement calling on remaining military facilities to voluntarily retreat to reduce the risk of further bombardment. 3 members supported it. Amara blocked it procedurally. She used a clause of the Council Charter regarding emergency powers during an ongoing threat assessment, which no one had ever used before. The minister looked at her across the table. "How long do you plan to drag this out?" "As long as it takes," she said. "People are dying." "I know." 412 people died in Resistencia, she said. "I know that each of those deaths is a tragedy, and I am not asking you to think otherwise, but I am asking you to trust the calculations. Sit down." He sat. He was angry. He remained angry for a long time. Amara checked her watch. 3 hours and 11 minutes. She took the next stack of incomplete documentation forms and began preparing for the next meeting with Teth. In orbit, Vorkin was eating when the voice of his sensor officer sounded over the bridge comms. "Admiral, the phantom signal has returned." He set his food aside. "From where?" "The same azimuth, 42 degrees from the ecliptic. But Admiral, this time it is stronger, significantly stronger." Vorkin walked to the bridge. He looked at the sensor readings himself. The signal was stronger, much stronger. "No, a signal? No. The array was trying to process a number but was struggling with its sheer resolution. "What am I seeing?" he said. "I am not sure," said his officer, and in the officer's voice was something Vorkin hadn't heard in a very long time. Uncertainty. "Give me the best number you have," Vorkin said. The officer looked at the display. "Current contact estimate, and this could be a sensor error. Admiral, the current estimate is over 400, perhaps higher. They are still resolving." Vorkin stared at the screen. He was trying to come up with what could produce 400 contacts in deep space at coordinates that the pre-invasion survey had marked as empty. Equipment malfunction? Diffraction of FTL residues on a large scale? Some coordinated asteroid formation? He tried to come up with anything that made sense. "Wake the fleet," he said. "All ships to combat readiness." Then he opened a channel to his weapons officer and said, "Target the orbital platforms first. If something is approaching, I don't want threats from above and below at the same time." He had done this 114 times. There had never been a 115th scenario, until now. The number on Vorkin's display continued to grow. First it was 400, then the resolution improved and it became 700, then 1,000, 200. Then the array's contact sorting system, which was designed for battlefield management and could track up to 3,000 individual vessels simultaneously, hit the limits of its capabilities and produced a number that Vorkin read twice because he was sure there had been a formatting error. There was no formatting error. 4,847 contacts. Classification: artificial vessels. Engine signature analysis: incomplete. Weapon signature analysis: incomplete. Origin species analysis: ongoing. Vorkin stood very still by the sensor console. He had a fleet of 600 ships. He was looking at nearly 5,000. His first officer, Commander Ashan, walked up to him and looked at the same display. A pause ensued. "Admiral," Ashan said. "I see it," Vorkin said. "I have to." "Give me weapon classification as soon as the analysis completes," Vorkin said. "And inform me as soon as any of these contacts change direction." He walked to his command chair and sat down. He pulled up the pre-invasion survey of this system on his secondary display. He looked at the coordinates where these contacts were now appearing. He looked at the survey data for the same coordinates. The survey had marked them as empty, confirmed empty. A full-scan drone pass conducted 14 months ago had found nothing. He looked at the date of the survey. Then he looked at the current date, 14 months. What was there now had not been there 14 months ago, or it had been there and they hadn't looked closely enough. He decided not to obsess over which answer was correct. It didn't change the situation before him. "All ships, combat formation Delta," he said. "Weapons ready. I want our shields at full power, and I want them there within the next 3 minutes." His bridge crew ran to their stations without words. Admiral Yusuf Mubarak watched the edge of the solar system approach on his forward display, and for the first time in a very long time, felt something close to peace. Not because the danger was low, the danger was immense. He was leading 4,847 ships against a Varn fleet that had spent centuries perfecting the art of orbital assault and resource capture. The Dominion had done this 114 times. They were professionals in the sense that only repetition can provide. But Mubarak had trained for this specific clash. His entire professional career, he had studied every Varn combat record that human intelligence had been able to obtain over 31 years of secret research. He knew how they formed, he knew how they communicated. He knew they were excellent at fighting in the way they had always fought, and that they had never needed to be anything else. He was about to give them a reason to be something else. "Active sensors," he said. "Full broadcast from all ships." His sensor officer lifted his head. "Admiral, that will also confirm our position." "I know," Mubarak said. "Do it." The fleet lit up. Every ship in the formation simultaneously switched from passive mode to full active sensor broadcast. Every engine went to full power. Every weapon system went to hot standby. The darkness they had been hiding in for 31 years vanished in an instant, and 4,847 human warships announced their existence to every scanner within 2 light hours. "Open all frequencies," Mubarak said. His communications officer opened the channel. Mubarak leaned forward slightly. "This is Admiral Yusuf Mubarak of the Earth Strategic Fleet's First Armada," he said. "We are broadcasting on all open frequencies to the Varn Dominion fleet currently in orbit of Earth. This is an official message from the government and people of planet Earth. You have 48 hours to withdraw your fleet from our solar system. Take your ships, take your personnel, leave our space. This offer will not be repeated and will not be discussed. That is all." He leaned back. His bridge crew waited. The channel crackled. Then a voice came through, translated smoothly, controlled. "This is Admiral Kale Vorkin of the Varn Dominion. Identify your origin. You are operating in officially surrendered territory under Dominion rule. Stop your ships immediately and explain the nature of your fleet. You have 60 seconds to comply before I classify this as a hostile action." Mubarak nodded to his comms officer, who left the channel open. "Admiral Vorkin," Mubarak said, "Earth did not surrender. Earth was buying time. Those are two different things. As for the nature of this fleet, it is ours, we built it." A pause on the other end. "That is impossible," Vorkin said. "And yet," Mubarak said. Another pause, longer this time. "You do not have the technology," Vorkin said. "The level of your species' development, our level of development was assessed based on what we chose to show you," Mubarak said. "We had 31 years to prepare for this conversation. We used this time differently than you expected." He paused. "I want to be honest with you, Admiral. We did not build this fleet to conquer territory. We are not an expansionist species. We built this fleet so that no one could ever do to us what you plan to do today. We built it so that the next time a Dominion ship drops out of FTL travel at the edge of our system, the officer on that bridge has a reason to reconsider." "You cannot win this fight," Vorkin said, "even with the numbers you are showing. The Dominion's combat superiority," Admiral Mubarak said. "With all respect, you did this for 114 planets." He paused. "None of those planets were us." He nodded to his comms officer. Channel closed. He stood up. "All ships, forward," he said. "Execute attack formation Prometheus. Weapons to battle readiness upon entering the kill zone. Let's go home." The moment the channel closed, Vorkin made 3 decisions very quickly. He redirected 40 ships from the resource perimeter to reinforce his front line. He instructed his communications officer to send an emergency signal to the nearest Dominion sector command. A request for a fleet full priority, whatever could be sent. And he sent a targeting order to his weapons department. The human fleet was to be classified as a hostile, irregular force and attacked without standard warning protocols. He had never before given such an order on a 4th-class world. Now he had. The first battle took place at the edge of Earth's orbital plane, and it did not go as Vorkin had planned. His front line opened fire with standard, heavy Dominion beam weapons energy spear cannons capable of piercing the shields of most other species' ships with 2 or 3 sustained hits. It was his weapon of choice in every battle he had fought. They were reliable. They were tested. They had never failed him. The beams hit the leading human ships. The shields held. Not completely. The first wave ships took damage. 2 of them were venting atmosphere from hull breaches. But the shields held much longer than the shield technology of a 4th-class civilization should have held. The human fleet continued to advance. Then the human fleet returned fire. And Vorkin suddenly and coldly realized he had been working with completely incorrect information. The weapons the human fleet carried were not those of a 4th-class civilization. They were something else, something created from a combination of human engineering principles and 30 years of reverse engineering. Every piece of Varn technology human intelligence had been able to get its hands on. Energy signatures that Dominion sensors struggled to classify. Kinetic delivery systems connected to directed energy charges in configurations that Dominion defensive architecture was not meant to handle because no one had ever needed to handle them before. In the first 4 minutes of the battle, Vorkin lost 11 ships. He had never lost 11 ships in the first 4 minutes of anything. He didn't lose them to a single destructive weapon. He lost them to overlapping, coordinated fire from multiple directions simultaneously. The human fleet spread through his formation like water, finding gaps, targeting the connections between his shield projectors, the space between his ships where coverage was weakly overlapped. They had studied his formation geometry. Of course they had. For 31 years they had studied everything. Vorkin began to adapt. He pulled the center of his formation back and extended his flanks, breaking the geometric distance the humans were using. The losses slowed but did not stop. On ESF-01, Mubarak watched the battle data scroll across his tactical display. His fleet was taking damage. Dominion weapons were better in their sheer individual power than any human one. When a Dominion beam weapon found a gap in a human shield, it found it catastrophically. The Stern Star, a heavy cruiser in the 3rd row of the formation, took 2 hits in a row, and its reactor was venting plasma. He watched as the damage report updated. He watched as the evacuation count began. He forced himself to look at it. Then he looked at the overall tactical picture. The Varns were regrouping. Vorkin was good, adapting faster than Mubarak had expected. The initial configuration exploit was closing. He would need to move to the second phase. Second phase, he said to his tactical officer. Initiate the enveloping maneuver, all flank elements, and tell Commander Reese to bring her squadron from the far side of the moon. I want them coming from the south. When the main formation attacks from the north, his tactical officer transmitted the orders. On the display, hundreds of ship markers began to shift. This was the part of the plan the Dominion wouldn't understand. Not because it was particularly complex, but because it was the kind of plan that made sense only if you were prepared to accept a certain kind of loss. The enveloping maneuver required ships to pass through a zone of concentrated Varn fire to reach their positions. Ships would be lost. The commanders of those ships knew it. They had volunteered for the maneuver position precisely because they understood the math and decided to be part of the math. Vorkin would not count on this. His models did not include a species that willingly accepted losses in exchange for positional advantage with such a degree of consistency. His experience told him that species, once they started losing ships, lost momentum. They retreated. They reevaluated. What his experience had never told him, because he had never needed to know it, was that there were species that accepted losses and kept coming. Down on the surface of Earth, the sky was no longer what it had been. The orbital battle was visible to the naked eye during the hours of dawn and dusk. Bright streaks of light, silent at this distance, moving too quickly and purposefully to be anything natural. People stood in the streets, in fields, and on rooftops and watched. They didn't know the details of what was happening. They didn't know the fleet was called the First Armada, or that Admiral Mubarak had been preparing for this day for 30 years, or that the woman who had developed this plan was sitting in a bunker 7 stories below street level, watching the same thing they were. They knew something was fighting for them. In the bunker, the council had stopped arguing. There was nothing left to argue about. The fleet had engaged. The plan was in motion. Whatever happened would happen, and no vote at the table would change its direction. Amara sat at the head of the table and watched the fleet's tactical feed. She was very still. Before her again stood the glass of water, still untouched. Chen-Hun sat beside her. After a while, he said, "How long have you carried this?" She thought. "Since the day I took the oath," she said. "The outgoing Secretary-General told me on that same day, put me in a room, exactly like the one I sent the signal from, showed me the program files, the number of ships, the estimated completion dates." She paused. She said, "This is either what will save us or what will prove we were never going to be saved. There is no third option." "And you believed it would work?" "I believed we had earned the right to try," Amara said. "That is different from believing it will work." She looked at the tactical display, at the thousands of ships moving across it, at the damage reports, at the casualty numbers slowly rising on the right side of the screen, at the Varn fleet, still formidable, still fighting, still confident even now that this would eventually end as it always had. Outside in the darkness over the world, her people were showing them the opposite. By the 14th hour of the battle, Vorkin had lost 61 ships. In his entire career, he had never lost 61 ships. He had won battles against species that had more ships than he did. He had won battles where his opponent had better weapons at the individual unit level. He had won battles where the terrain and positioning did not favor him. He was, by any standards the Dominion used to measure such things, an excellent combat commander. What he was not was prepared for an enemy that fought the way humans fought. The problem wasn't their numbers, though the numbers were a problem. The problem wasn't their technology, though their technology was consistently better than the pre-invasion assessment had suggested. The problem was that every model Vorkin used to predict enemy behavior was built on the general assumption that an enemy, upon reaching a certain threshold of losses, would start prioritizing survival, consolidating, retreating to regroup. Humans crossed what should have been that threshold. At the 6th hour, they didn't retreat. They accelerated. The tactic that cost Vorkin the most ships was the one his tactical analysts struggled to name correctly. Ultimately, they recorded it in the battle log as a deliberate proximity intercept, which was the clinical description of something that, in practice, made several of his officers physically uncomfortable to watch. When a human ship was too heavily damaged to continue effective combat at a distance, its crew did not eject and did not surrender. They directed the ship at the nearest Varn vessel and pushed their engines to maximum, not to destroy themselves in an explosion. Dominion shields handled explosions. The humans knew this. What the humans did was crash their damaged vessels into Varn ships at high speed, using their own hull as a kinetic weapon. And then this was the part that led to the classification deliberate proximity intercept, because no one on Vorkin's staff wanted to just write what it actually was. They depressurized their internal compartments and vented the remaining crew through breaches into space, where Varn ships, now facing sudden contact with the hull and the structural aftershock from a multi-ton mass impact, had their shields temporarily destabilized, and where other human ships, positioned at pre-calculated angles, waited for exactly that window of destabilization. The sequence unfolded in seconds. A damaged human ship uses its final maneuver to close with a Varn vessel. Impact. Shield breach. The human crew does not survive. 3 or 4 human ships at a distance fire through the breached shield window before it stabilizes. Vorkin lost 9 ships that way in 90 minutes. They are sacrificing themselves intentionally, his first officer, Ashan, said not as an accusation, but as a fact that had to be stated because admitting it was the first step toward accounting for it tactically. I know, Vorkin said. Our models don't know. I know, Vorkin said again. He looked at his display. He adapted. He kept his damaged vessels further back to minimize windows for this tactic. He kept his ships in tighter mutual shield support configurations so the destabilization windows were covered by neighboring ships. He adapted, and it worked. The problem was that every time he adapted, the humans adapted in response. Commander Alana Reese swung around the far side of the moon at the head of her squadron at the 9-hour mark. She had 14 ships left of the 17 she had started with. Mumbai had taken a beam hit that destroyed its forward engine section and was drifting. Lagos had lost 3 of its 4 weapon systems and was fighting with the remaining one, which its weapons crew reportedly called Carlos and treated with more affection than was probably standard. São Paulo itself had hull damage on the port side from which atmosphere was leaking at a rate Alana had decided to classify as manageable. She had trained her crew for 6 years. She had been in this program for 11 years. She hadn't been born into it, like some of the younger crew members. She had been recruited at 32 after a career in the Brazilian Navy, after a quiet background check she hadn't understood at the time, after a meeting in a room with no name on the door where a very calm woman explained what was coming and what was being built to meet it. She had said yes immediately. She had never wondered if it was the right decision. Her squadron bypassed the moon's southern orbital axis in tight formation. Tight enough to look like one large object on Varn long-range sensors if they weren't looking closely, and they weren't looking because all their attention was focused on the main battle in the northern orbital plane. Alana looked at her tactical screen. She saw Mubarak's main force pressing hard on the Varn center. She saw the Varn formation gradually compressing as the human fleet's numerical advantage and willingness to suffer losses pushed them to higher orbital zones. She also saw a window. There was a gap between the Varn eastern flank and their secondary reserve formation, a gap that existed because Vorkin had pulled his reserve inward to reinforce the center, which had been the right decision given the pressure on the center, but which had opened a corridor leading straight to the rear of his command formation. All ships, Alana said. We hit the gap. Weapons to battle readiness. Our priority target is the command formation in the rear of their fleet. If we can give Mubarak's people a clear path to Vorkin's flagship, we win this fight today, not tomorrow. She paused. Hold shields. Keep communicating with each other. If you lose your engine, report to me immediately. Another pause. Go. São Paulo surged forward. Mubarak saw the movement of Reese's squadron and felt something close to gratitude. He had planned this. He had put Reese in that position specifically because he trusted her assessment of the tactical situation more than a preset order. It was impossible to calculate a flanking maneuver through the gap in 30 minutes. You needed someone on the spot who could see the moment and act. She had seen it. She had acted. Press the center, he said to his tactical officer. All main formation elements forward. Full assault. We won't give Vorkin time to close that gap. On his display, the main formation surged forward. The Varn center, already under pressure, was hit from 2 directions simultaneously. From the front by Mubarak's main force, and from the south, east by Reese's squadrons breaking through the gap. The formation didn't break, but it compressed, and in compressing, it created overlapping shield geometries that interfered with the ship's own weapon systems. The Dominion was a precision civilization. Precision required space. The humans had just deprived them of space. Reese's squadron lost 2 ships passing through the gap. Durban took a full beam hit at close range and fell apart. She saw it on her display and kept moving. Karachi had its navigation system destroyed and was moving only on manual control. She told its commander to hang back and cover the gap from closing, and he said he would do it. She arrived at the rear of the Varn formation with 11 ships. Vorkin's flagship, Absolute Dominion, easily recognizable by its size and central position in the command cluster, was before her protected by 8 escort vessels, but its rear shields were not at full power because it was oriented toward the main battle. She had perhaps 90 seconds before Vorkin realized what was behind him. "Target the flagship's engine section," she said. "I want it maneuver-crippled, not destroyed. We want it intact. All ships, coordinated fire on my command. 3, 2, 1. Fire." 11 ships opened fire simultaneously. Absolute Dominion shuddered. Its rear shields absorbed most of it, but not all. 2 of the engine nodes on its lower hull were destroyed by weapon fire that slipped through an overloaded shield seam. The flagship lost 20% of its maneuverability. The escort vessels turned to respond. Sao Paulo took a beam hit on its damaged port side. The hull breach Alana had classified as manageable immediately became less manageable. Alarms sounded on half the bridge consoles. "Damage report," she said. "Hull breach, venting atmosphere. Decks 4 through 6, said her damage officer. "Emergency seals failing." Another hit, this time on the starboard side. The lighting on the bridge switched to emergency red. "Alana," said her first officer. He had never called her by her first name. "I need 60 more seconds," she said. "Keep firing." Mubarak received the damage report on Rees's squadron as he watched the main battle begin to tilt noticeably, irreversibly, in favor of the human fleet. Then his signals officer turned away from her console. "Admiral, we intercepted an emergency Dominion transmission. Priority 1. Sector command level." She looked at him. They requested reinforcements. "A second fleet." Sector command confirmed an estimated arrival. She double-checked the numbers. 72 hours. 72 hours. Mubarak looked at his tactical display. His fleet had been in battle for 15 hours. He had lost 312 ships. His people were tired, his ships were damaged, and his enemy was wounded but not broken. And in 72 hours, a second Varn fleet would arrive. He did not allow himself to think about what the second fleet looked like. He already knew that Dominion Sector Command could mobilize between 800 and 1,200 vessels upon a request for priority assistance. "How long can we maintain this pace of battle?" he asked his tactical officer. The officer was silent for a moment, calculating the numbers. At the current attrition rate, 36 to 40 hours of effective combat capability. He needed to finish this in 36 hours while keeping enough of the fleet to present a credible deterrent to the arriving reinforcement fleet. He looked at Absolute Dominion on his display, partially disabled, surrounded, but fighting. Vorkin was still commanding, still adapting, still managing a fleet that was losing but not defeated. To finish this fight, he needed that ship. He needed Vorkin. "Contact Commander Rees," he said. Rees responded immediately. Behind her on the bridge, it was noisy. The sound of damage control could be heard. "I see the flagship," she said before Mubarak could speak. "I've been working on it. Its engines are partially disabled. If you can give me 2 more squadrons from the main formation, I can—" "Alana," Mubarak said. She stopped. "What is the status of your ship?" A pause. Manageable, honestly. A longer pause. "We can fight for another 6 hours before hull integrity becomes a serious problem." "Withdraw your squadron to the rally point," Mubarak said. "You've done your job. You opened the gap." "I can't." "You've done your job," Mubarak said. "This isn't a critique. It's the most important thing I will say to you today." He left the channel open for a second. "Great work, Commander." He cut the connection. He turned to his tactical officer. "I need 6 squadrons from the northern formation. Send them through Rees's Gap. Target the flagship and its escort cluster. I want them pushed toward the central battle zone. I want him surrounded, not cornered. Cornered, an enemy fights harder. Surrounded, one must make a decision." "Yes, Admiral." He looked at the display at the battle that had been 31 years in the making, at the ships and the people, and at the terrible, extraordinary price of what they were doing, at the 64 hours they had left until the second fleet arrived. "This ends today," he said quietly. He wasn't sure he believed it, but he needed to, so he said it. On the display, 6 squadrons turned toward the flagship. They moved. 6 squadrons attacked Vorkin's escort cluster from 3 directions simultaneously. 2 of the escort vessels were destroyed in the first engagement. A third lost its weapon systems and drifted. The remaining 5 grouped into a tight defensive formation around Absolute Dominion. For 20 minutes they really held, absorbing hit after hit, responding with the same they were receiving, because the crews of the Varn escorts were not poorly trained, and they understood what it meant to let a command ship fall. But there were too many human ships, pressing from different sides. By the 18th hour of battle, Absolute Dominion was left alone. Its shields were operating at 40%. Its engine power was 30%. It had lost half its weapon systems, but the remaining half was still firing, still accurate, still inflicting damage on the ships, pushing it to the center of the battle. Vorkin was good even now, even here, surrounded and damaged. He was still the best combat commander in the Dominion regional fleet, and he fought like one, but he had nothing left to send. His fleet was broken, but not destroyed. Hundreds of Varn ships were still fighting across the battle zone, but broken in the operational sense, no longer a coordinated force. Individual ships were conducting their local battles, unconnected to a wider strategy, because the wider strategy had been dismantled ship by ship over 18 hours. They fought the way the humans fought. Mubarak looked at the readings of the flagship's shields on his display and made a decision. "Boarding action," he said. "Prepare boarding parties." Human boarding teams had been part of the First Armada's training program from the beginning, not because anyone was sure it would come to this, but because Mubarak had insisted on it 15 years earlier when the program's tactical planning department had conducted scenario modeling. Most scenarios that ended in a decisive human victory, not just a military victory, but a strategic, long-term, message-sending victory, involved the capture of an enemy command ship intact with its admiral inside. The planning department had asked him how he intended to breach the hull of Varn ships. He had said, "The same way we breach everything. We find a weak spot and hit it until it opens." The boarding teams had trained in pressurized corridors, in rigid suits, and with melee weapons specifically created for close-quarters combat. They had trained against mock-ups of Varn ships built from every scrap of intelligence gathered by human operatives over 3 decades. They had trained in the dark, because Varn ships operated on different light frequencies than human ships. They had trained in noise and smoke, in zero-G, and in all other conditions one could imagine. They were ready. The shields of Absolute Dominion flickered at 32% and held. Mubarak gave the order. 3 assault shuttles launched from nearby human vessels. Fast, small, built on such a low level of the electromagnetic spectrum that the Varn point defense systems had difficulty targeting them cleanly. 2 of them reached the flagship's hull. 1 was destroyed on approach. The 2 survivors set breaching charges and burned through the outer hull in 40 seconds. Inside Absolute Dominion, the alarms were a continuous, multi-layered sound that Vorkin had stopped consciously processing 20 minutes ago. He registered it the way he registered breathing, as background, as the context of the moment. He stood at his command console. His first officer, Ashan, was beside him. The bridge was operating on low power. Half the consoles were dark. Emergency lighting painted everything in a flat red glow. Through the forward viewing panes, he could see the human fleet surrounding his ship at close range, close enough that he could distinguish individual hull details on the vessels pressing in on him. He had already sent the message to his crew, "Fight deck to deck." It was a message he had never sent before. He had never been on a boarding action. Not a single ship in the Dominion fleet had been boarded in his lifetime. Boarding actions were a primitive tactic, a close and ugly way of fighting that civilizations had abandoned as their weapon technology perfected. The Dominion hadn't needed to board an enemy vessel for 3 centuries. The humans, apparently, hadn't received that notification. He heard the breach 2 decks below. He heard the hard suits in the corridors, the distinct sound, the weight of armored humans moving quickly in a pressurized environment, a sound no one on his crew was trained to handle because no one had trained for this. He heard the fighting. He thought about what to do. He had the option to destroy his own ship. Every Dominion command vessel had a self-destruct mechanism for precisely this scenario, to prevent the capture of secret equipment and information. He had the authorization. He had the code. He stood there for a long time. Then he thought about the people he had watched for 18 hours. He thought about the ships they had rammed into his fleet. He thought about the squadron that had broken through the gap, and the hours of combat it had taken to close it, and the price of those 18 hours on both sides. He thought about the 72 hours until the arrival of his reinforcement fleet. He thought about what would happen when that reinforcement fleet arrived. If Mubarak's fleet was still here and still intact and still ready to fight the way it had fought, he thought, they will return. No matter what happens here today, The humans will return after this. That was what the last 18 hours had taught him. Not that they were invincible, not that the Dominion couldn't eventually suppress them with enough force, but that they would return again and again and again with everything they had left, from any direction that presented itself, until the last of them was gone. They would return because that was who they were. It was a fundamental characteristic of the species that no pre-invasion survey had ever measured, because no pre-invasion survey had ever needed to measure it. They didn't stop. He could detonate the core. He could kill everyone on this ship, his crew, and the people storming it. He could deny them the symbolic prize of a command vessel. And then the reinforcement fleet would arrive in 72 hours, find Mubarak's fleet waiting for it, and they would fight again, and the humans would suffer even greater losses, and the Dominion would suffer even greater losses. And eventually the weight of Dominion numbers might perhaps be enough, or not, because they didn't stop. He took his hand off the detonation panel. "Ashen," he said. "Admiral, tell our people to cease fighting. Open the bridge doors." Ashen stared at him. "Admiral, do it," Vorkin said, "and open a channel to the human fleet all frequencies." The bridge doors opened. The first to come through was a woman in a hard suit, with no markings other than a flag painted on her left shoulder, a flag his translation system identified as belonging to a country called Nigeria, a soldier. And Vorkin could see through the helmet visor that the soldier was a young woman, with a cut above her eye from something that had happened in the corridor fighting. She entered the door with her weapon raised and scanned the room with the thoroughness of someone who had trained for this moment many times. Behind her followed 4 more soldiers. Then a 6th figure, taller, moving with a specific, careful purposefulness of a person accustomed to rooms going quiet upon their entry. Admiral Yusuf Mubarak removed his helmet. He looked around the bridge. He looked at the damage, at the red emergency lighting, at the console readings showing the state of the battle outside. He looked at the arms of the Varn crew, still visible. He looked at Vorkin, standing in the center of all this, upright, still composed with the specific dignity of a person who had made a decision he intended to execute without hesitation. Mubarak stopped a few meters from him. They looked at each other. For a moment, "Admiral Vorkin," Mubarak said. "Admiral Mubarak," Vorkin said. A pause. "I have opened a channel to my fleet," Vorkin said. "They are ordered to cease fighting. I am prepared to officially exit this system." He paused. "I want to know one thing." "Ask," Mubarak said. "We surveyed this system 14 months ago," Vorkin said. "We found nothing. We found a 4th-class civilization with a primitive army and no capability for the fleet we met today." He looked at Mubarak with his pale eyes. "How long were you building?" 31 years, Mubarak said. Vorkin considered this. "You built all this," he said, "in 31 years, knowing we were coming?" "Knowing that someone like you was coming," Mubarak said. "We didn't know your name. We knew the shape of the problem." "And your people?" Vorkin said. 8 billion people on that planet below us. They didn't know their government had been building a military fleet for 3 decades. "No," Mubarak said. "Wasn't that a deception?" Mubarak seriously considered this. "We were protecting a secret. One leak would have significantly changed the calculations. So perhaps we wouldn't be having this conversation." He paused. "They know now." Vorkin was silent for a moment. "My reinforcement fleet arrives in 69 hours, he said. "I know," Mubarak said. "They will have combat data. They will come with greater force and better preparation. I know that too." "Then you understand this is not the end." Mubarak looked at him firmly. "No, this battle is over. Whether the larger conflict is over depends on what your reinforcement fleet commander decides when they arrive and see what awaits them." He paused. "I would like to believe a species as ancient and experienced as the Varn Dominion is capable of recognizing a situation and making a rational decision about whether it is worth continuing." Vorkin looked at him for a long time. "And if not, then we fight again," Mubarak said simply, without drama. "And we keep fighting until someone makes a rational decision." Vorkin was silent. Outside the viewports, the guns had gone quiet. The battle zone, which had been illuminated by weapons fire for 19 hours, plunged into darkness. Human ships and the surviving Varn vessels floated in the same space, motionless, like debris floating after a storm. "I will recommend a withdrawal," Vorkin finally said to his fleet, "to Sector Command, to the reinforcement fleet when it arrived." He paused. "I cannot guarantee they will follow my recommendation." "I understand," Mubarak said. "That is all I ask, your honest recommendation." He held out his hand. Vorkin looked at the gesture. He knew what it meant. The translation system identified it as a human gesture of formal agreement and mutual respect, usually involving physical contact with an open palm. He reached out and took it. They shook hands in the red emergency light of a broken bridge on a ship that had come to seize a world and found something it wasn't prepared for. An official ceasefire was transmitted across the battle zone within an hour. The Varn fleet began its withdrawal from Earth's orbit 18 hours later, after logistical details of the disengagement were worked out. They moved in a cautious formation. Damaged ships, fewer than had arrived, taking their dead. As the Dominion protocol required, they flew away. The sky over Earth was clear. For the first time in 4 days, Amara was in the bunker when the last Varn ship left the outer edge of the solar system. She watched it on the sensor feed. She watched the signal point blink and fade as the ship transitioned to FTL mode. Then she sat in the silence and let it settle. Around her, the council was talking this time, not arguing, just talking the way people talk when something big has just ended, and the full shape of it has not yet manifested, but everyone feels that it is coming. Chen Hun sat beside her. He had sat beside her for most of the last 4 days. "It worked," he said. "This part worked," she said. "We still have 66 hours. What if the reinforcement fleet doesn't turn back?" She looked at the empty sensor feed, where the last Varn ship had just been. "Then we trust Mubarak," she said, "as we always have." Mubarak sent a message to the galaxy 3 days later, not specifically to the Varn Dominion, but to everyone, to every civilization within range of a standard long-wave broadcast, which was most of the inhabited galaxy within several hundred light-years. It was short. He had written 7 drafts before settling on the final version. The first 6 were too long, too many words explaining what the facts explained better themselves. The final version read as follows. To any civilization receiving this transmission, my name is Yusuf Mubarak. I am Admiral of the Earth Strategic Fleet's First Armada, representing planet Earth and its 8 billion inhabitants. 4 days ago, a fleet of 600 Varn Dominion warships entered our solar system and demanded our surrender. We refused. We engaged their fleet and disabled their command vessel. Their fleet has exited our system. We are not a warlike species. We do not seek territory. We do not seek conflict. We built this fleet because something was coming for us, and we chose to be ready. We are always ready. Earth is unavailable. That is all. The message was attached to the full sensor record of the battle, every minute of it, every exchange of fire, every change of formation, every ship lost on both sides, every decision made. Anyone who wanted to understand what had happened could watch it from beginning to end and draw their own conclusions. The message spread at the speed of light in all directions, carrying 19 hours of combat data and 11 words that would eventually reach every inhabited system within the broadcast zone. At a distance of 412 light-years, on an outer orbital station of a system whose name translated roughly as Collective Management of the Seventh Sun, a data officer named Pirayet extracted the incoming transmission from the long-wave queue and ran it through the translation matrix. He read the header. He flagged it for his supervisor. His supervisor read it. They sat together in the station's small monitoring room for several minutes, not talking. Then the supervisor pulled up the expansion projection maps on a secondary display, maps that showed the Seventh Sun's planned trajectory for territorial growth over the next 100 years. One of the corridors on that map passed through a sector that contained, among other minor systems, a small yellow star with 8 planets, the third of which was a green-blue world with large surface oceans. The supervisor stared at the corridor for a long time. Then she highlighted it on the map. She labeled it with one inscription, "Do not approach." She saved the file. She closed the display. She returned to her other work. The message continued to spread into the darkness in all directions, becoming smaller and weaker with distance, but never stopping completely, the way light never stops, just becomes too weak to measure, carrying its 11 words through the years. We are always ready. Earth is unavailable. In the solar system it had come from, on the planet it spoke of, 8 billion people looked at their sky, now clear, now quiet, belonging to them again. And most of them knew no details, but felt everything. They were still here. That was enough. That was, for the moment, everything.